Hello there. Tonight I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and inhale. No, really inhale. Can you smell that bouquet of sweat-soaked togas, fermented fish sauce, and public latrine vinegar? Welcome to Imperial Rome, where emperors bathe in filth as proudly as they parade in silk. Tonight we'll peel back the perfume facade of the greatest empire on earth and uncover its dirtiest secrets. Shared sponge sticks, urine-washed laundry, bathhouse backwash, and more. So plug your nose, steady your stomach, and step inside. The stench of history awaits. If you enjoyed tonight's story, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, subscribe, or maybe comment on where you are listening from. So whether you are getting ready to settle down for the night, looking for a distraction from work or study, or maybe just looking to relax for a while, you found the right place. Quiet the noise of the modern world. Sit back, relax, and we will begin our journey. Ancient authors often boasted that the Roman elite bathed daily, and 19th century Romanticism eagerly equated marble bath suites with modern sanitation. Archaeology and textual nuance disrupt that tidy narrative. In private balnea adjoining aristocratic apartments, the cleansing sequence began not with water, but with oil. Attendants warmed yesterday's olive pressings over a brazier until the liquid thinned and its faintly rancid edge mellowed into nuttiness. Additives, cassia, frankincense, myrrh, nard, cinnamon, were whisked in according to household fortune and fashion. The oil, now fragrant and viscous, was massaged into the skin until every fold gleamed. Only then did strigils, curved bronze blades, enter the scene. Drawn across oiled flesh, they scraped away a paste of spent perfume, dead skin, and sweat that had accumulated during the previous day's exertions. The residue was wiped onto linen rags, pressed into jars, and resold as gladiators' liniment or quack medicine. Nothing from an aristocratic body went to waste. Even filth could turn a modest profit once recast as elixir. Water arrived last and sparingly. Many private bath suites lacked pools. Instead, a slave ladled tepid water from a marble basin, whose surface bore rainbow sheens of yesterday's oils and the occasional floating gnat. The rinse diluted odors just enough to keep them mobile, allowing perfume vapors to follow their wearer into reception halls where clients, poets, and petitioners awaited. Masking, not purging, was the guiding principle. This aromatic veil served overlapping purposes. First, it signaled wealth. Spices that lent Roman perfume its potency. Nard trekked across Himalayan passes, cinnamon cut from Ceylonese bark, resins tapped in southern Arabia, had crossed deserts and oceans. Their price, magnified by import taxes and middlemen, placed them far beyond the reach of most citizens. To smell richly was to broadcast an economy of conquest made literal, olfaction as empire. Second, fragrance claimed medical authority. Galenic medicine ranked odors according to the four humours. Sweetness was thought to calm black bile, spice to warm chilled blood, and musk to repel pestilential vapours. As epidemics crept through crowded tenements, the ruling class cocooned itself in sweetness, convinced that no miasma could penetrate so costly a barrier. Yet the practice produced unintended consequences. Resinous layers clogged pores, encouraging clothing to absorb perspiration until silk linings stiffened and wool stripes darkened. Laundering such garments required the fuller's vats, where slaves trampled cloth in fermented urine whose ammonia cut grease and brightened dyes. Linen and silk deteriorated quickly under this treatment, so elites simply re-wore robes until odor signaled that another round of oil and strigil was overdue. Palatial corridors stored these scents like amphorae. Marble absorbed lamp smoke by day and exhaled it under the torchlight of evening, layering new notes over old. The resulting atmosphere impressed visitors less as a single smell than as a stratified climate. Cinnamon lofted beneath coffered ceilings, olive garum tang hugging the mosaics, charcoal embers lurking in hypocaust vents. Even the faintest bodily emission, wine breath, digestive upheaval, an unwashed sandal, could upset the fragile equilibrium and ripple outward as social commentary. Beyond palace walls, the phenomenon reproduced itself in microcosm. Townhouses aped imperial fashions. Middling households concocted ersatz colognes from vinegar and laurel. Bathhouse entrepreneurs advertised imported scents by burning pellets outside their doors. Thus, urban air became a map of class. Near street level, where slaves emptied chamber pots and goats awaited slaughter, ammonia and whey dominated. One story up, shopkeepers blended myrtle and rosemary. On rooftop terraces, hosts attempted to outrank neighbors with clouds of balsam thick enough to drift across alleyways like banners. Not everyone applauded. Moral treatises of the early Principate framed perfume as proof that Rome's virtues had dissolved in Eastern luxuries. Writers praised mythical ancestors who, unsoftened by foreign oils, had conquered the Mediterranean with honest sweat. Their rhetoric overstated rural austerity, but it voiced genuine unease that sensory excess might herald civic decline. Modern science adds a cautionary footnote. Lead acetate, sugar of lead, appears in several preserved recipes as a fixative to stabilize volatile oils. Chemical analyses of hair strands from desert burials reveal lead concentrations far above natural background, suggesting chronic exposure among those who could afford the best scent. Neurological symptoms that puzzle classical biographers, irritability, memory lapses, spasms, now read like textbook lead poisoning, intensifying the tragic irony. Perfume meant to protect the elite from disease became a vector of slow self-destruction. To understand imperial aroma is to surrender modern binaries of clean versus dirty. Roman strategy embraced bodily effluent as inevitable and directed ingenuity toward its reinterpretation. Attendants, merchants, physicians, and lawmakers collaborated, knowingly or not, in engineering a civic identity that floated upon oil, spice, and smoke. In this schema, odor equaled legitimacy. Sweetness signified dignity. Rancidity, shame. The nose, not the eye, often delivered the first judgment. Contradictions abounded. Engineered aqueducts trumpeted the empire's mastery of water, yet plumbing delivered that water through lead pipes into houses where it rarely touched skin. Statues immortalized perfect physiques, while real bodies sweated beneath unlaundered silk. Citizens ridiculed barbarian ignorance, yet accepted communal sponge sticks in public latrines. By the 4th century, the calculus began to change. Trade disruptions in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean drove up costs, and Christian asceticism reframed ostentatious scent as prideful. Edicts attempted to cap perfume expenditures. Rhetoric praised plainness. Alternatives such as pine resin and vinegar regained popularity. The olfactory register of Rome softened, though never fully surrendered its association between fragrance and authority. Centuries later, medieval pilgrims wandering ruins noted mouldering stone, stagnant cisterns, and hints of sulfur venting from long abandoned sewers. Yet guidebooks still warned that the ancient city was once so perfumed, one could taste the air. Legend exaggerated, but it preserved the truth. Rome's power was sensory. Marble monuments have crumbled, but the idea of an empire that ruled by smell lingers in languages and metaphors that link sweetness to civilization and stench to disorder. Imperial aroma, therefore, was no incidental byproduct. It was infrastructure, chemically elaborate, economically vast, culturally codified, medically rationalized, and, in the end, environmentally and physiologically hazardous. It exemplifies the Roman genius for transforming necessity into spectacle. Where water might have cleansed, oil performed. Where sweat might have confessed toil, resin narrated leisure. Where silence might have acknowledged decay, scent insisted on glory. The toga, the voluminous, semicircular wool garment, famed as the uniform of Roman citizenship, rested at the intersection of fashion, politics, ritual, and surprisingly pungent chemistry. Few articles of clothing have carried such symbolic weight while receiving such brutally practical treatment. Worn draped over a tunic and secured by deft folds rather than by clasps or pins, the toga proclaimed freedom, gender, rank, and moral standing. Yet because its snowy surface so visibly betrayed every speck of dust or bead of sweat, it also exposed an inconvenient truth. Rome's climate, its crowded streets, and its bustling forums conspired to soil prestige faster than any citizen could acquire it. Early Republican togas were undyed, their natural cream hue absorbing the brown tones of unscoured sheep's wool. Over time, as bleaching technologies developed, pure whiteness became synonymous with virtue. Candidates seeking office selected the toga candida. Chalk brightened until it practically glowed beneath Mediterranean sunlight. Hence the root of the modern word candidate. Senators flaunted a broad purple stripe. Boys and magistrates displayed narrower bands. The textile's expanse left ample surface for dirt, which quickly darkened draped folds and produced a map of daily errands. Charcoal smudges from braziers, iron oxide from construction dust, olive oil spatter from tavern counters. Wool's microscopic scales trapped these pollutants deep within the fibre. While linen garments could be rinsed in a household basin, a soiled toga demanded professional intervention. Compounding the challenge, wool shrank and matted if subjected to vigorous washing in hot water or harsh alkaline soap, exactly the treatments available in antiquity. Romans therefore delayed cleaning for as long as appearances allowed, airing the fabric overnight, brushing off visible debris, perhaps sprinkling perfume along the collars to mask stale human odor. Rewear without laundering was not laziness. It was pragmatic textile conservation. Only when the garment's smell or stiffness threatened social embarrassment did its owner surrender it to the fullers. Fulonicae, the industrial laundries dispersed through every Roman town, operated at the pungent frontier between cleanliness and contamination. Their business model converted domestic waste into cleansing agent. Each morning, collectors roamed alleys to empty chamber pots into large amphorae, sometimes wheeling carts labelled stercoraria, dung carts. The trophies of this harvest, human urine, were pooled in cisterns within the laundry courtyard. Left to ferment under the Italian sun, the liquid developed a high concentration of ammonia as urea decomposed. By the 1st century CE, the system had become lucrative enough to attract imperial attention. The Emperor Vespasian famously imposed the vectigal urinae, a tax on urine sales from public latrines to fullers. The levy underscored two realities. Waste possessed measurable value, and the laundering profession reached a scale visible to the state treasury. Though later writers joked about the odious source of revenue, the tax persisted because it tapped a commodity indispensable to maintaining Rome's public image of snowy garments. A single toga could pass through multiple fullers' hands, each step adding expertise and smell. Fees scaled with garment size, fabric quality, and the desired level of brightness. Elites could afford frequent treatment. Commoners patched and re-wore progressively dingier cloth, reinforcing class distinctions through hue. Within workshop walls, labourers stood ankle-deep in urine vats, rhythmically treading garments to force the ammoniac solution through woolen fibres. The process, akin to kneading dough, relaxed dirt-holding scales and emulsified skin oils entombed inside each strand. Archaeological excavations at Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Ostia reveal the architectural anatomy of a typical Phylonica. The entrance courtyard contained dolia, half-buried ceramic vats up to 1 meter in diameter, where the primary soaking occurred. Adjacent rooms housed rinse basins supplied by lead pipes, and rooftops featured broad terraces where garments could be spread to dry beneath volcanic sky, or sprayed with sulfur fumes to intensify whitening. Workers progressed garments through a sequence resembling modern industrial lines. After urine treading, cloth was transferred to running water basins and beaten with wooden paddles to flush loosened grime. Fuller's earth, a clay rich in aluminosilicates, sometimes supplemented this rinse, its absorbent particles capturing residual grease. Finally, sulfur was burned in enclosed cabinets, filling the chamber with sulfur dioxide gas that bleached organic pigments but also irritated lungs and eyes. Each step left olfactory footprints. Ammonia rose sharp and throat-catching from the tread vats. Wet wool steamed lanolin vapors into enclosed courtyards. Sulfur dioxide added an acrid sting, reminiscent of struck matches magnified 1,000-fold. Visitors approaching a Phylonica at midday would first notice a shimmering heat haze, then a yellow plume, then a wall of smell so dense it seemed to push back against entry. Despite relentless odour, the workshops thrummed with the energy of a critical urban service. Inscriptions record guilds of fullers sponsoring public games, erecting altars, and even petitioning emperors. Their economic clout counterbalanced social prejudice that labelled them malodorous and, by extension, morally suspect. Modern science illuminates the efficacy beneath the stench. Ammonia raises solution pH, converting free fatty acids in grease to water-soluble ammonium salts, while simultaneously opening wool's cuticle scales. The treading action supplies mechanical agitation, and the subsequent acidic sulfur dioxide rinse re-swells fibers, locking them into smooth alignment and restoring drape. The cycle, alkali swell, rinse, acid contract, mirrors principles still used in textile finishing, albeit with synthetic detergents and controlled pH baths. This chemical choreography produced crisp folds and brilliant whites impossible through simple water washing. The side effect, inevitably, was chemical residue. Finished garments retained faint ammoniac or sulfurous notes that mingled with body heat once worn, creating the distinctive aura of a freshly laundered Roman citizen. Subsequent applications of perfume masked the tang, but never entirely banished it. Thus, the social nose learned to interpret a complex spectrum. Too much sulfur suggested recent cleaning, but perhaps modest means. Lingering sweat signaled thrift or negligence. Phyllonicae occupied liminal urban zones. Property leases in Pompeii cluster laundries along streets leading toward the city gates, placing them downwind of prevailing breezes and away from elite residential quarters. Yet their proximity to marketplaces reveals a pragmatic tolerance. Distance minimized odor for the wealthy, while keeping garments within half-day delivery of customers preparing for forum appearances or dinner parties. the smell gradient became a navigational tool. Children learned that sharper ammonia indicated approaching laundries. Drivers herding mule carts adjusted routes to avoid spooking animals irritated by sulfur. For the enslaved couriers dispatched to retrieve clean togas, the odor served as proof of proximity, like the ringing of a shop bell. Urban life internalized olfactory landmarks as thoroughly as visual ones. The fuller's trade extracted a biological toll. Constant exposure to high ammonia concentrations damaged respiratory mucosa, inflamed eyes, and corroded skin between workers' toes. Skeletons recovered from Herculaneum's beachfront warehouses, likely inhabited by laborers, display bone lesions consistent with chronic infection, exacerbated by poor air quality. Municipal regulations attempted mitigation. A decree from the city of Puteoli capped vat depth and mandated freshwater rinses before discharge into sewers. Enforcement, however, competed with profit margins and habitually lagged behind practice. Effluent poured into street drains, combining with tannery runoff, slaughterhouse blood, and human sewage. When summer heat reduced stream flow in the cloaca maxima, these combined fluids stagnated, amplifying miasmatic theories that linked smell with plague. Citizens burned incense in doorways, not merely for piety, but as prophylactic filters straining urban air. Paradoxically, the harsher the bleach, the stronger the association of whiteness with civic virtue. Candidates seeking office intensified laundering cycles in the weeks preceding elections, hoping to dazzle spectators with luminous cloth. Vestal virgins, the spiritual custodians of Rome, commissioned togas washed until translucence hovered just short of fiber destruction. The whiteness fetish thus drove demand for ever purer urine, encouraging collectors to target military barracks where diets rich in protein produced higher ammonia excretions. In a curious twist of empire, legions guarding distant frontiers unknowingly donated chemical firepower to political theatre in the capital. Over time, the Christianization of Rome recast whiteness in spiritual rather than civic terms. Liturgical garments adopted linen, less dependent on urine treatment, yet wool togas persisted in senatorial processions until the empire's administrative collapse in the West. Late antique fullers diversified into dyeing and felt making, but the foundational technology, fermented urine tread vats, outlived the empire itself, surviving in medieval cloth towns from Flanders to Florence. Modern laundries replaced urine with synthetic ammonia only in the 19th century. Even today, the whiff of an industrial textile plant on a humid afternoon echoes ancient alleyways of Pompeii. While few urbanites link the scent to Roman history, etymology preserves the lineage. The Latin lavar, to wash, bequeathed words like lavoir and lavatory, embedding fuller's labour in everyday speech. The toga has vanished from wardrobes, but the logic of rewear endures in contemporary debates over fast fashion, water scarcity, and dry cleaning chemicals. Roman citizens confronted similar dilemmas: conserve resources or risk social stigma. Their solution, transforming waste into wash, was ingenious, resource efficient, and environmentally hazardous in equal measure. It stands as a testament to human creativity under constraints and a warning about unintended consequences when cleanliness becomes spectacle. With garments reclaimed from the fullers, citizens paraded the forum scented by lingering sulfur and newly applied myrrh, convinced that their crisp folds reflected inner discipline. Yet beneath the whiteness lay history's compost: urine, sweat, clay, and sulfuric fumes stitched invisibly into every stitch. Next, we follow the communal sponge to expose how the empire confronted, often communally, its most intimate waste. public latrines formed one of Rome's most distinctive social and hydraulic infrastructures. Excavated examples, from the grand 70-seater of Lepsis Magna to the modest 6-hole facility behind Pompeii's Macellum, reveal a layout nearly unchanged across centuries and provinces. A long masonry bench perforated by regularly spaced keyhole apertures, fronted by a shallow gutter of running water, all enclosed within walls painted with mythic frescoes or utilitarian plaster. In the centre, a wider channel conveyed waste toward the nearest branch of the city sewer. What distinguished Roman toilets from modern equivalents was not engineering ambition, but the principle of shared equipment. A single wooden, bone or metal rod tipped with a sea sponge, the xylospongium, served as the standard device for post-defecation cleaning. Upon entry, a patron stepped onto a slightly raised pavement designed to keep sandals above splashes from the central trough. The seating bench, often marble-clad in elite venues, extended along 3 walls, turning an everyday bodily function into a face-to-face event. While seated, users could reach forward to the narrow water-filled gutter. Inside this gutter, which received a constant trickle from an adjacent cistern or diverted aqueduct branch, floated one or more sponges secured by thin ropes. The continuous flow both rinsed the sponge between uses and masked odours drifting upward from the larger waste channel. The system leveraged hydraulic head. Gravity drew fresh water downward through terracotta pipes, cascaded it beneath the bench, and finally swept it into the main sewer, where it joined a slurry of runoff, kitchen refuse, and slaughterhouse effluent. A side shelf often held jars of vinegar or brine. Before returning the xylospongium to the gutter, a user swished it through this acidic bath, trusting that vinegar's pungency equated to antisepsis. Chemical assays of mineral encrustation on latrine pipes confirm elevated acetic acid residues, supporting the textual references to vinegar rinses. Yet the practice offered only limited hygienic benefit. Pathogenic bacteria can survive short exposure to weak acid, especially when embedded in organic matrices, such as sponge fibers. The communal sponge emerged from pragmatic resource management. Imported sea sponges constituted a valuable commodity, prized for their absorbency and softness. Individual ownership would have required a dedicated supply chain capable of matching Rome's population, an impractical prospect even for an empire spanning 3 continents. Allowing one implement to circulate among dozens of users drastically reduced logistical burden at the cost of increased infection risk, a trade-off invisible to contemporary medical theory, which still framed disease in terms of imbalanced humours or malignant miasmas rather than microscopic agents. Over time, the sponge acquired ritual associations. In military camps, latrine duty involved collecting, rinsing, and inspecting the communal implement, reinforcing discipline through shared discomfort. In urban guilds, apprentices began their day by refreshing vinegar jars, a task viewed as foundational to mastering shop hierarchy. Epigraphic graffiti, carved illustrations of sponges dangling from rods, appear on latrine walls, functioning as visual instructions for illiterate users and as bawdy commentary on bodily realities otherwise absent from official monuments. Modern parasitological studies of coprolites from Roman sewer deposits uncover eggs of whipworm, roundworm, and liver fluke in densities far exceeding those in contemporary Western sanitation systems. The communal sponge ranks among the most efficient hypothesized transmission routes. Its porous structure provided shelter for helminth larvae, while the warm, moist gutter encouraged rapid microbial proliferation. The cycle became self-reinforcing. Higher parasite loads increased gastrointestinal distress, driving more frequent latrine visits and accelerating sponge turnover. Yet the system did not collapse under its own biological weight. A series of mitigating factors, though imperfect, moderated risk. First, high through-flow water rates in major cities such as Rome and Carthage diluted pathogens. Second, vinegar baths, while insufficient to sterilize, curbed odor and thus maintained the perception of cleanliness. Third, diet laced with pungent herbs and resins may have offered marginal antiparasitic effects, though quantifying this influence remains speculative. Social custom therefore balanced on a knife edge between unacceptable filth and tolerable routine. Rome's sewer network, crowned by the massive Cloaca Maxima, anchored latrine performance. The Great Drain's vaulted channel accepted combined flows from smaller drains, street gutters, bathhouse effluent, and public toilets, eventually discharging into the Tiber below city walls. Engineers weighted the benefits of conveying human waste out of sight against the hazard of river contamination. They opted for constant dilution. Rome's daily aqueduct supply approached 1 cubic meter per resident, a figure unmatched until the Industrial Revolution. Even so, sedimentation pockets within sewers, revealed by modern camera surveys, contain thick strata of fecal sludge, embedded coins, and lost jewelry. Time capsules of citizenry who once perched above the flow, sponge in hand, contemplating the day's market prices or Senate decrees. Seasonal floods periodically reversed drainage, forcing fetid water back through latrine channels and inundating ground floors. Residents responded by constructing raised thresholds and plugging bench apertures with temporary stone slabs. The incremental elevation of street levels across centuries partly reflects repeated efforts to outrun rising layers of flood-deposited sewage. Thus, the communal sponge operated within a dynamic landscape where water, waste, and architecture negotiated space in slow-motion conflict. Access to public latrines crossed class boundaries more readily than many other urban facilities. Senators, slaves, merchants, and foreigners could find themselves seated shoulder to shoulder, equalized by physiology. Nonetheless, status signaled itself through subtler cues. Wealthier users dispatched household slaves ahead to reserve seats, identifiable by cloths draped over apertures, or supplied personal linen wipes for final polishing after the communal sponge. Women's participation varied by locale. In Rome proper, most large latrines were mixed sex, while provincial cities sometimes maintained separate facilities. Artistic decor occasionally leaned toward erotic or comedic motifs, suggesting a cultural acknowledgement of the latrine as liminal space, where social norms bent but did not fracture. Spoken conversation, though ubiquitous, rarely survived in textual transmission. What endures is the spatial evidence of intimacy. Seating distances shorter than 60 centimeters, absence of partitions, and shared hand-washing basins. To modern sensibilities, such proximity appears intrusive. To Romans, it reinforced collective identity and habituated citizens to the empire's larger project of communal infrastructure. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, maintenance of long aqueduct chains faltered under fiscal strain and invading armies. Reduced flow undermined sewer hydraulics, causing stagnation and odor escalation. Elite quarters turned inward, installing private latrines that emptied into pits rather than public conduits. In these contexts, the communal sponge gradually ceded ground to personal textile squares, destined for burial layers of rubbish dumps ringing shrunken urban cores. Ecclesiastical writers framed the shift as moral improvement, privacy equating to modesty, though the underlying driver was likely infrastructural decay rather than theological awakening. Simultaneously, legal codes began citing fines for improper sponge disposal, indicative of mounting waste management challenges. Absent reliable water flow, gutters clogged, and sponges abandoned in situ fostered insect swarms. Archaeologists exploring late antique strata at Ephesus discovered clusters of desiccated sponges beneath latrine benches, many still wrapped around wooden handles, narrating abrupt cessation of cleaning routines. The communal sponge finds indirect descendants in medieval Europe's moss-covered sticks, early modern French papier retrouvé, recycled paper, and 20th century Eastern military barracks, where shared cloth strips persisted. Each adaptation reflects tension between resource scarcity and hygiene aspirations. Only with the industrial pulp paper boom did single-use toilet tissue displace reusable implements in the global north, mirroring a broader cultural pivot toward disposability. Modern sewer systems, while technologically advanced, still wrestle with foreign objects, flushable wipes, sanitary products, that echo ancient dilemmas of what society chooses to share, discard, or recycle. Today, museum displays of xylospongia elicit visceral shudders, serving as shorthand for Roman oddity or decadence. Popular imagination often inflates the disgust factor, overlooking the logical integration of sponge technology into an urban ecosystem predicated on aqueducts, sewers, and communal habits. The sponge's true lesson lies in its contextual contingency, a tool simultaneously innovative and unhygienic, efficient and perilous, unremarkable to its users yet startling to their descendants. Artifacts, carbonized wooden handles, mineralized sponge fragments, limestone benches polished by thousands of thighs, encode a choreography of movement, pause and cleansing, enacted millions of times without fanfare. Through them, historians reconstruct not events of statecraft, but rhythms of ordinary life essential to sustaining any civilization. The communal sponge embodies Rome's ambivalent genius, turning the sea's bounty into sanitation, while courting parasites in the process. Its story intertwines hydraulics, commerce, microbiology, and social psychology, illustrating how a simple object can mediate vast systems of infrastructure and ideology. As we progress, our attention shifts from latrines to bathhouses, where torrents of tepid water promise purity but often circulated contamination. There, amid marble pools and strigil-bearing attendants, whole neighborhoods converge to sweat, scrape, gossip, and sometimes drown in their own collective backwash. The Roman bathhouse, whether the vast public thermae financed by emperors or the modest balneum annexed to a townhouse, stood as the empire's most celebrated emblem of hygiene, leisure, and civic equality. Marble pools, mosaic floors, bronze fountains, and vaulted caldaria conveyed an aura of spotless refinement. Yet the ritual that unfolded within these walls mingled heat, sweat, oil, blood, cosmetics, food crumbs, and occasional bodily waste into a circulating broth that challenged every notion of cleanliness. Archaeology and hydrological modeling now reveal how Roman engineering both facilitated and obscured this constant churn of contamination. Water arrived at bath complexes via elevated aqueduct branches that sustained steady head pressure throughout daylight hours. Gravity delivered tens of thousands of liters daily into a network of settling tanks, lead or terracotta pipes, and bronze valves. From there, flow split between two critical systems: the furnaces, prefurnia, that heated the caldarium and sudatorium floors by hypercaust, and the bathing basins themselves, frigidarium for cold immersion, tepidarium for warm lounging, caldarium for hot soaking. Settling tanks nominally allowed sediment to drop out before water entered the pools, but daily throughput exceeded the capacity of most tanks, to clarify fully. Mineral scale building up on the walls of antechambers from Pompeii's Stabian baths testifies to the presence of suspended calcium carbonate that would later flake off into pools. Meanwhile, furnace stoking consumed vast quantities of wood. Ash particulates drifting through flue outlets settled onto hypocaust floor tiles and later tracked into water by bathers' feet. Engineers designed overflow channels, scuppers cut into marble rims or terracotta drains offset from floor level, to keep pool depths constant. These outlets carried surface film away, yet turbulence produced by human bodies ensured that much of the suspended matter remained in circulation, returning through siphoning eddies rather than exiting cleanly. Central to Roman bathing was the act of anointing skin with oil, often reused from kitchen presses, and then scraping it off with a bronze strigil. This sequence accomplished partial exfoliation, while imparting a glossy finish prized as emblematic of vitality. Hundreds of strigil sets recovered from military forts to villa bath suites demonstrate the ubiquity of the practice. Oils were sometimes perfumed but more commonly rancid, having oxidized in clay, amphorae left unsealed during transport. A bather began in the warm tepidarium, allowing pores to relax, then progressed to the hotter caldarium where perspiration erupted freely. Attendants or friends poured oil onto the shoulders and worked it over limbs. When enough sweat oil mixture accumulated, the strigil blade swept it into troughs running along the bench or directly onto the tiled floor. From there, gravity guided the viscous runoff to a corner drain. Yet archaeological residue survives in grout joints and hypocaust inspection channels. Dark, greasy deposits rich in human epidermis, sebum, and microbial colonies. Poetry and legal commentaries mention a secondary market for gladiator scrape, the collected drops from athletic bathers, used as medicine for muscle aches. Whatever volumes were harvested, the majority escaped into drainage, where it emulsified with warm water, forming buoyant slicks observable today in cross-sections of calcitic stalactites that hung from sewer vaults under baths at Ostia. These slicks trapped pollen grains, insect legs, and textile fibers, producing chronological barcodes inside the stalactite layers that researchers date by microstratigraphy. Thermi, such as those of Trajan, inaugurated 109 CE, and Caracalla, completed 216 CE, could host several thousand patrons daily. Contemporary census estimates suggest Rome's urban core possessed one bathing place for roughly every 700 inhabitants, yet peak hours compressed usage into intense waves. During the Meridetio, the extended lunch break when workshops closed, crowds surged from workshops and forums into the baths, paying a small fee or entering freely on festival days. An inscription from the suburban baths at Porta Marina in Ostia records a single-day attendance of 2,500, a plausible figure given basin volumes and turnover. Each visitor added perspiration and microbial load proportional to immersion time. Modern laboratory experiments using recreated bathwater compositions indicate that a single 10-minute soak can release up to 1 gram of skin cells and 100 million bacterial cells into lukewarm water. Multiply by thousands of bathers, and the organic burden becomes staggering, especially once oils suppress surface disinfection by chlorine-free water. Thermal gradients encourage bacterial blooms. Pseudomonads thriving at 37 degrees Celsius colonized residual soapstone scum lining pool edges. Romans possessed no germ theory, yet they sensed danger in stagnant water. Building codes required regular scouring of basins with abrasives such as pumice and sand. Graffiti admonishing attendants to empty the pool appear in the suburban baths. Still, full drainage entailed shutting off furnace fires, a costly prospect in fuel and time. Consequently, many complexes adopted partial flow maintenance. Only the cold frigidarium was drained nightly, while caldarium and tepidarium waters lingered for days, diluted each morning by fresh inflow, but seldom replaced wholesale. Bathhouses combined relaxation with convivial dining. Vendors positioned near entrances sold figs, cheese, boiled eggs, honeyed pastries, even fried dormice in urban centres. Excavations at Sagalassos in modern Turkey uncovered pebble mosaic floors littered with fruit pits and small bones. When a patron padded from snack stand to tepidarium, morsels clung to moist hands, detaching later into water. At Caracalla, microfossil analysis of drain sludge identified grape seeds and wheat chaff alongside parasitic eggs, confirming that food debris made its way into the hydraulic circuit. Personal accessories also vanished beneath the surface. Bronze hairpins, cameo rings, glass beads, lead curse tablets from Aqui Sulis, Bath, UK, attest to bathers' frustration at such losses, listing stolen items and petitioning deities for vengeance. Metal detectors track an accidental economy of misplacement. Coins tossed for luck or dropped from purses created conductive horizons within bath drain layers, marking financial interactions indistinguishable from votive acts. Mixing ratios of sweat, urine, occasionally released surreptitiously in caldaria, and oil raised ammonium, urea, and free fatty acid concentrations. Heat accelerated hydrolysis reactions, souring the aroma and encouraging nitrifying bacteria that converted ammonium to nitrite and nitrate. Small amounts of dissolved lead leached from supply pipes where carbonate scale had not yet formed a protective layer, reacting with fatty acids to precipitate lead soaps, visible as metallic pastel residues adhering to travertine. Isotopic analysis of scale inside the Serapis Temple cistern, a backup water source for the baths of Caracalla, demonstrates cyclic contamination peaks corresponding to festival calendars, when heavier attendance forced water recycling. Even with aqueduct abundance, hydraulic engineers occasionally throttled inflow to balance downstream grain mill operations, inadvertently elevating contaminant concentrations within baths during drought or maintenance shuts. Beyond chemical complexity, bathhouses produced a cacophony of echoes. Splashes magnified by vaulted ceilings, furnace rumble diffused through floor suspensors, strigil scraping resonating like metallic cicadas. Warm vapor condensed on marble and bronze, forming droplets that trickled back into pools, carrying airborne dust and lamp soot. Olfactory notes shifted hourly, from pinewood smoke and singed resin in the morning, to citrus peel rubbed on bodies at midday, to vinegar waves released when attendants washed benches at dusk. Visitors toggling between frigidarium shock and caldarium steam subjected cardiovascular systems to stress cycles attractive to medical writers, but strenuous in reality. Osteological studies on skeletons from suburban cemeteries show ear exostoses, surfer's ear, consistent with repeated cold water plunges, suggesting habitual use that left lasting marks on physiology. Municipal decrees attempted to discipline the watery environment. A fragmentary inscription from the Colonia of Valeria Caesarina lists fines for attendants who allowed muddy water to stand past the third watch or who neglected collection of oil scrapings. In practice, enforcement hinged on patronage and bribes. A popular bathhouse could flout rules if its operator maintained political connections. Catastrophic failures are nevertheless documented. The baths of Nero closed temporarily after a structural collapse dumped furnace ash into the tepidarium, forcing emergency drainage and leading to graffiti praising the finally clean water that followed. When seismic tremors cracked cistern walls, as at Hierapolis in Phrygia, underground springs infiltrated the system, mixing sulfurous mineral water with aqueduct supply and triggering mass complaints about egg-like stench, complaints that only resurfaced in building renovation edicts decades later. Despite hazards, Roman bathing endured for half a millennium, sustained by aqueduct economics and social expectation. Not until the 6th century, when Gothic sieges severed supply lines and timber shortages starved furnaces, did the great complexes fall silent, gradually converting into marble quarries, gardens, or monastic cloisters. Ironically, partial ruin restored water clarity. Rain pooled in abandoned frigidaria, devoid of oil and sweat, supporting frogs and lilies rather than parasites. Medieval bathhouses revived on smaller scales, but struggled without continuous inflow, and the memory of communal immersion shifted from vigorous health practice to moral suspicion. When Renaissance humanists measured shattered vaults of Caracalla, they recounted the engineering grandeur, yet seldom grasped the biochemical turmoil once roiling beneath those arches. Contemporary spas employing circulated mineral water rely on chemical disinfectants, pump filters, and turnover ratios calculated in cubic meters per bather. Still, outbreaks of Legionella and cryptosporidiosis occasionally remind operators that warm, nutrient-rich water remains an ecological playground. The Roman experience foreshadows these challenges, demonstrating that scale amplifies risk and that sensory polish can mask microbial unrest. The phrase, clean as Roman baths, persists in travel brochures, detached from scientific scrutiny. Yet core dilemmas, how often to drain, how thoroughly to scrape oil, how to balance energy cost against hygiene, mirror debates in 21st century water parks and hotel pools. Even the push for sustainable grey-water recycling echoes ancient compromises between resource conservation and contaminant load. Bathhouse backwash exposes the tension between public spectacle and biological reality, an architectural triumph fueled by ceaseless throughput, maintained via laborious scraping, and haunted by organisms too small to name. And now we move on to the empire's beloved fish sauce, permeated breath, kitchens and marketplaces, leaving olfactory imprints as persistent as any bathhouse vapor. Long before aluminum cans and factory yeast transformed the modern food landscape, Rome's kitchens relied on a condiment born of decay. Garum, also called liquamen in certain periods, originated as a byproduct of salted fish preservation. Over centuries, it evolved into a luxury commodity whose pungency infiltrated every corner of Roman life. Banquet halls, military outposts, sick rooms, and, most enduringly, breath. Like oil scraped from skin or urine trodden into togas, fermented fish sauce illustrated Rome's capacity to exalt waste, turning olfactory offense into social capital. The geographical arc of garum production stretched from Baetica in southern Hispania through Mauritania Tingitana on the Atlantic seaboard to Dalmatian inlets along the Adriatic. Archaeologists identify factories by rows of masonry vats, ceteriae, embedded in coastal bedrock. Each vat stood roughly chest-high and wide enough to swallow an entire trawler's haul. The process began with layering small fatty fish, anchovies, mackerel, sprats, sardines, together with copious salt. Offal from larger tuna or swordfish often topped the pile. providing proteolytic enzymes that jump-started decomposition. Summer heat served as catalyst. Over 6 to 9 months, the mass collapsed into a stratified slurry. Dense solids collected at the bottom. A pale, viscous brine pooled above. Workers periodically stirred vats with wooden paddles, dosing the surface with fresh salt to deter insects and suppress foulest rancidity. Slowly, endogenous bacteria and autolytic enzymes cleaved proteins into amino acids, creating glutamate-rich liquor reminiscent, at molecular level, of modern soy sauce. The Romans lacked laboratories but recognized quality by sight and smell. Premium garum, called floss, gleamed amber and exuded a sharp, almost sweet aroma that connoisseurs likened to ripe cheese mixed with seawater. Inferior grades resulted when fermentation progressed unevenly or raw material contained too much visceral blood. Such liquors earned labels like Alec and were sold cheaply to labourers or recycled as livestock feed. Even refuse had value. Amphora stoppers made of cork recovered at Monte Testaccio bear ink inscriptions tracking downgrade sales within a hierarchy of merchants. Analytical studies of residue scraped from Dressel 711 amphorae reveal high concentrations of monosodium glutamate, naturally formed, organosulfur compounds, and trimethylamine oxide reduction products, each contributing layers to garum's formidable bouquet. Salt concentration hovered between 15 and 25%, sufficient to inhibit many pathogens, yet not high enough to halt halotolerant microbes. These organisms unlocked volatile fatty acids, caproic, butyric, isovaleric, that produced the hallmark odor that clung to processing sites long after abandonment. Excavators at the Spanish town of Bailo Claudia reported olfactory traces still detectable in soil 2 millennia later, an anecdotal testament to garum's chemical tenacity. Once fermented, garum was decanted into ceramic amphorae, sealed with pitch, and branded with tituli picti listing producer name, place of origin, and sometimes parasite-free certification. Ships carried the cargo up the Rhone and Tiber, through the Straits of Messina, and along Black Sea grain routes. Distribution hubs near Rome's Monte Testaccio hillside dispatched thousands of amphorae monthly. Empty vessels, too brittle for reuse, accumulated in a shard mountain eventually exceeding the height of nearby Aventine Hill, each fragment still faintly redolent of its salty cargo. In urban domus kitchens, a cook splashed garum into stews, doughs, and even wine punches. Roman cookbooks attest that nearly every savoury dish called for a measure, regardless of the main ingredient. The sauce supplied not only salt, but also an umami depth that intensified as liquids reduced over charcoal fires. Combined with honey, vinegar, or pepper, garum formed dressings that coated vegetables otherwise considered medicinal rather than pleasurable. Overindulgence, however, guaranteed a lingering aftertaste that championed the spice cabinet long after plates were cleared. During the Principate, export of Betican garum rivaled olive oil and wine in imperial tax ledgers. A single factory complex might employ hundreds. Fishermen, salt rakers, vat tenders, amphora kiln labourers, coopers. Seasonal cycles dictated village population flux. Absent refrigeration, catches had to be processed immediately, tying coastal economies to both lunar fish migrations and imperial Annona grain convoys that dictated trade ship itineraries. Customs stations levied duties on garum based on volume and quality grade. Port authorities issued lead seals, plombae, crimped around amphora necks, authentication tokens now prized by numismatists. Counterfeiting existed. Some traders diluted high-grade sauce with seawater or blended alec into Flol's consignments. Edicts threatened stiff fines, yet chemical mimicry remained difficult to police without modern assays. Consumer trust rested on recognizable branding. Stamped impressions of producers such as Aulus umbricius scarus, whose emblematic dolphin straddling an amphora denoted premium product across the Mediterranean. Inhalation of garum's volatile compound started at fork level. Once consumed, the sauce's fragrant molecules coated oral mucosa and lodged in sinus cavities, radiating outward with every exhale. Contemporary satires ridiculed dinner guests whose fishy exhalations extinguished lamps or overwhelmed the sweet smoke of imported Nabatean frankincense. Physical remains corroborate comedic exaggeration. Dental calculus scraped from skeletons at Herculaneum contains isotopic signatures of high marine protein intake, indicating frequent garum consumption rather than occasional treat. Because garlic, onions, and strong cheese were already fixtures on Roman tables, discerning garum-specific breath required a sensitive nose. Yet enclosed triclinium chambers saturated with oil lamps and human warmth, the sauce's ammoniac top notes cut through rival odors, announcing themselves unmistakably. Etiquette manuals urged guests to rinse mouths with diluted wine between courses. Amphora fragments recovered from villa latrine pits displayed toothmark indentations along rims, evidence of impromptu gargling. Garum breath thus became a marker of convivial indulgence. Elites tolerated it as the olfactory price of Epicurean delight, much as they tolerated bathhouse vapor or toga sulfur tang. Servants, ever positioned within whisper range, bore the brunt silently. Their own rations likely contained lower-grade sauce, ensuring mutual exposure that normalized, though never neutralized, the smell. Physicians catalogued garum among therapeutic syrups. Diluted with honey, it addressed sores of the mouth. Mixed with wine and warm water, it functioned as emetic or laxative according to dose. Galenic treatises prescribed small spoonfuls to convalescents for electrolyte replacement, anticipating modern sports drinks in rudimentary form. Soldiers stationed on arid frontiers received garum concentrates to replenish salt lost through sweat, intertwining dietary luxury with military logistics. Superstitions accumulated alongside empirical practice. Women seeking to conceive carried cloths dipped in garum under tunics, trusting fertility to its life origin symbolism. Fish spawning in vast numbers. Mariners anointed ship keels with leftover residue before long voyages in hopes the reek would deter teredo worms. Priests sprayed diluted sauce at altars dedicated to sea deities, leveraging pungency as olfactory prayer. Beyond palates and apothecaries, garum's production exacted an ecological toll. Sludge drawn off fermentation vats was dumped along shorelines, generating anaerobic zones where scavenger crabs thrived, yet seagrass died. Excavation cores beneath Cadiz wetlands revealed dark bands rich in fishbone microfragments dating precisely to peak factory years, followed by a brief decline in mollusk diversity. Factory workers contended with corrosive brine etching calluses into fingertips and ammonia fumes inflaming mucous membranes. Osteological lesions on ribs and vertebrae recovered from factory cemeteries suggest chronic respiratory stress. Lead also joined the toxic mix. Amphora interiors coated with lead-based pitch slowly leached the metal into acidic sauce. Chemical assays of residue show levels high enough to contribute marginally to systemic lead burden in frequent consumers. The phenomenon mirrors parallel contamination from water pipes, reinforcing a pattern wherein Roman technologies harnessed convenience at hidden physiological cost. garum's afterlife extends beyond archaeology. Medieval cookbooks from Islamic Al-Andalus adapted the source into murri, a barley-based fermentation redolent of soy, yet visually recalling liquamen. Southern Italian colatura di alici carries the lineage forward. Amber anchovy extract poured over spaghetti in coastal villages, accompanied by warnings against deep inhalation. In Southeast Asia, artisanal fish sources rely on near-identical processes, demonstrating a convergent culinary logic wherever salt meets surplus fish and sunlight. Modern sensory panels evaluating reconstructed Roman recipes consistently rank garum-heavy dishes as intensely savory but divisive, mirroring ancient tensions between attraction and repulsion. The phrase strong fish sauce breath persists in some Mediterranean dialects as colloquial shorthand for indiscretion or overeating, an echo of a world where status and stench coexisted without apology. Just as bathhouses blurred boundaries between purification and pollution, garum dissolved distinctions between delicacy and decay. Its scent wove through clothing fibers, clung to tavern rafters, and drifted on merchants' caravans across alpine passes. Hidden within every satisfied sigh after a loaf dipped in sauce lurked molecules of putrefaction, rebranded as pleasure. And now we look at the glistening beauty of Roman smiles, immortalized in marble busts and silver coins, appear defiantly pristine, yet anatomical reality diverged sharply from sculptural ideal. Excavated skulls from necropoles at Isola Sacra, York and Palmyra display a catalogue of oral afflictions. Rampant attrition, caries penetrating to pulp, abscess craters eroding jawbone, and calculus so thick it resembles coral reef. Behind this damage lay dietary habits heavy in honey and dried fruit, abrasive bread stone grit, and medical theories that attributed pain not to bacteria, but to tiny burrowing worms. Consequently, Roman dental care vacillated between ingenious mechanical intervention and treatments that magnified harm. Roman grain mills employed basalt stones that inevitably shed minute siliceous particles into flour. Bread baked from such meals sanded enamel with every bite, accelerating wear patterns most visible on molars of infantry soldier remains from dura Europos. Combined with frequent consumption of dates, figs, and honey-steeped cakes, a carbohydrate-rich film coated teeth, feeding acid-secreting bacteria long before the concept existed. Skeletal isotopic analysis indicates average adults ingested upwards of 40 grams of fermentable sugars daily, levels comparable to modern processed diets, but without benefit of refined toothbrush technologies. Attrition shortened crowns, exposing dentine which wore faster still, leaving flat plateaus across molar rows. Where enamel edges met softer dentine microcracks invited bacterial colonization. Over time, acid secretions dissolved calcium apatite, creating cavitations that could not be seen until pain announced their presence. Medieval folklore would later adopt the image of toothworms gnawing nerves, yet Roman medical treatises already recorded the creature. The physician Scribonius Largus described wriggling filaments believed to migrate deeper when probed, likely pulpal tissue extruded by decay, misidentified in the flicker of lamplight. Despite flawed etiology, Roman medicine assembled sophisticated dental instruments. Pompey's House of the Surgeon yielded a bronze probe slender enough to negotiate interproximal spaces. Army forts surrendered iron elevators shaped for tooth extraction. Traveling medics stocked scalpels, forceps, chisels, and cautery irons heated in charcoal braziers. Written catalogues authored by Celsus and later by Paul of Aegina list steps to trepan an abscess, incise gum, evacuate pus, irrigate with wine and vinegar, pack with pulverized myrrh. Some patients survived the procedure, others succumbed to septicemia, their graves lined with traces of submandibular drainage tubes carved from goose quills. Wealthier citizens resorted to gold wire ligatures to stabilize loose teeth. A notable find near Limoges uncovered a mandibular premolar bound to its neighbor with twisted gold thread, the earliest orthodontic splint recognized in Europe. The same principle appears in Etruscan bridges where donor teeth, or animal teeth carved to fit, were lashed into gaps, creating cosmetic continuity, albeit limited chewing strength. Resinous mastics scented with frankincense attempted to seal junctions, yet repeated exposure to garum acid eroded adhesive bonds, necessitating frequent replacements. Daily maintenance relied on powders scattered onto moistened fingers or woven chew sticks fashioned from mastic tree branches. Recipes preserved in an ostraca from Oxyrhynchus blend crushed pumice, oyster shells, charcoal, nard oil, and dried rose petals. While charcoal and shell offered mild polishing, pumice particles several hundred microns wide scoured enamel, thinning its protective layer. Overzealous scrubbing produced abrasion grooves, visible as V-shaped notches on cervical margins of teeth, exhumed from the Vatican necropolis. Manufacturers packaged powders in small ceramic pots, stamping lids with abbreviated ingredients. A fragment from Vindolanda lists Krokkeiper ATR, decoded as crocus, saffron, for color, cypros, henna, for scent, and atramentum, lampblack, for whitening illusion by optical contrast. Buyers applied the grey mixture before social gatherings much like modern whitening strips, spitting residue into alley gutters where drains already carried bathhouse oil and fish sauce runoff. Mouth rinses complemented abrasives. Vinegar diluted with water, infused with mint or parsley, created an acidic environment momentarily refreshing, yet detrimental to softened enamel. Wine served similar purposes, its ethanol flushing food debris, while tartaric acid undermined mineral structure. The paradox mirrored toga laundering. Solutions that delivered immediate cosmetic gains eroded substrates they sought to protect. Archaeological reports from the Forum of Nerva describe bronze toothpicks, dentiscalpia, sold by street vendors alongside ear scoops. Elite diners flicked residue from interdental spaces between courses, signaling refinement. Wall paintings in the Predia of Julia Felix depict banquet scenes where attendants hold tiny sticks on trays, implicitly preventing unsightly detritus from marring post-meal conversation. Overuse, however, created wedge-shaped gaps that encouraged plaque retention, perpetuating a cycle of pick, bleed, swell, pick again. Public latrine excavations yield tooth combs carved from boxwood, their triangular tines designed to scrape lingual surfaces. The same artifact family appears as lice combs, underscoring Hygiene's Composite toolkit. One implement served scalp, beard, and mouth, with only perfunctory rinses between. Microscopic analysis of calculus flakes trapped in such combs recovers cereal starch granules and plant fibers, confirming oral application. Mixed-use objects amplified cross-contamination risks unimaginable before germ theory's dawn. Dental pain ranked among common complaints addressed by household pharmacopoeia. Recipes collated by the herbalist Dioscorides recommend clove-like spice, syzygian, possibly Eugenia, Gief. Despite its limited Mediterranean range, implying long-distance import for analgesic eugenol content. More ubiquitous ingredients included poppy latex, dissolved in warm milk, and held against aching molars until numbness descended. Laudanum's precursor thus entered dental care centuries before Paracelsus coined the name. When pharmacological palliatives failed, cauterization promised final silence. Hot needles inserted into carious cavities sought to kill the hypothetical worm. Skeletal evidence of intracoronal thermal damage is scarce due to cremation, yet discolored dentine rings on some teeth hint at heat application. Alternatively, fumigation with henbane seeds burnt on charcoal produced hallucinogenic vapors inhaled through a reed aimed at offending tooth, an uncanny parallel to modern nitrous oxide sedation, albeit without monitoring equipment. Romans praised white teeth in literary tropes, but accepted imperfection as age marker. Satirists mocked elderly senators whose blackened stumps rattled during oratory. Love poetry extolled youth's snowy rows. Barbershops advertised miracle pastes promising bright smiles, the ancient equivalent of influencer sponsorships. Graffiti in Herculaneum toots, dentifricium panzer, Panzer's tooth powder, claiming it makes breath sweeter than lilies, a fragrant nod to garum breath anxieties. Statues remained immune to decay, fostering illusion. Marble approximated dental outline without cavity. Portrait bust patrons paid sculptors to omit diastemata. The disparity between artistic and skeletal record thus widens, cautioning historians against conflating aesthetic propaganda with lived biology. Comprehensive dental surveys across imperial cemeteries reveal patterns. Soldiers present lower caries rates due to protein-heavy rations, but elevated fractures from hardtack biscuits. Urban females exhibit higher enamel hyperplasia tracing childhood malnutrition. Rural farmers display extreme occlusal wear, yet fewer abscesses, likely because coarse diets scraped plaque before acid fermentation. Radiographic studies of mummy heads from Fayum show alveolar bone degeneration, consistent with chronic periodontitis, underscoring systemic conditions exacerbated by inflammatory oral flora. Dental calculus offers micro-archives of diet, occupation, and environment. Proteomic extraction identifies milk proteins in male remains from the Claudian harbour, contradicting textual claims that dairy was unmanly. Micro-charcoal particles trapped in calculus of Pompeian bakers mirror oven soot inhalation. Pollen grains map seasonal work schedules. Each mouth becomes a stratified record surpassing clay tablets in intimate detail. Lead again compounded dental woes. Pipes delivering aqueduct water leached ions that integrated into hydroxyapatite, subtly shading teeth grey. Microlaureates from X-ray diffraction detect lead substitution peaks, aligning with bone lead levels, and cognitive symptomatology hypothesized to destabilize political leadership quarters. Meanwhile, acidic garum marinade facilitated ion exchange, micro-etching enamel, and accelerating uptake. Thus, disparate hygienic, culinary, and infrastructural practices converged within the oral cavity, forging a nexus where empire-wide behaviors etched microscopic stories. As aqueduct maintenance faltered in late antiquity, water stagnation promoted bacterial load, worsening oral infections. Simultaneously, sugar from imported Indian cane entered elite diets, elevating caries prevalence above Republican baselines. Christian ascetic writers began equating physical suffering, including toothache, with spiritual purification, dampening demand for invasive dental procedures. Gold wires vanished from graves, replaced by simple prayers etched into pewter amulets hung around patients' necks. By medieval times, extraction supplanted restoration, resetting dental practice toward radical rather than conservative interventions. Yet fragments of Roman technique endured. Pumice-based powders continued in Byzantine apothecaries. Islamic scholars translated Celsus on abscess drainage. Monastic scribes preserved toothpick fashions, albeit recast as moral admonitions against vanity. Modern toothbrush filaments supplant chew sticks. Fluoride replaces charcoal, but abrasive action and mouth rinses echo antiquity. Roman dental disaster exemplifies a wider pattern. Inventive solutions aimed at immediate relief, ignorant of microbial ecology, inadvertently feeding cycles of decay. Scented powders camouflaged infection, gleaming gold-bound rotting roots. Searing irons silenced nerves only to invite further pathogens. Now we shift focus from microscopic parasites to macroscopic pests, lice, fleas, and bedbugs that swarmed Roman palaces and tenements alike, thriving in bedding stuffed with goose down and straw, reminding citizens nightly that personal boundaries were as porous as their city's sewers. Long after banquet torches dimmed and lyre strings fell silent, another society awoke within Roman dwellings, a teeming microfauna of lice, fleas, bedbugs, mites, and rodents. From marble-clad imperial apartments to cramped insular garrets, these creatures exploited architectural crevices, textile folds, and the warm humidity that permeated a city built on crowds and combustion. Their unseen empire flourished precisely where human ambition reached its zenith, revealing hygienic contradictions beneath polished facades. Roman sleep typically unfolded upon mattresses stuffed with materials that balanced comfort, cost, and status. Goose down topped the hierarchy, followed by wool flock, straw, chaff, and in thriftiest quarters, dried seagrass. Each filler material harbored arthropods at different trophic levels. Down's labyrinthine barbs offered incubators for lice eggs. Straw's hollow stalks sheltered flea larvae. Chaff retailed fungal spores hitchhiking from granaries. Regular turning and airing slowed infestation, yet heavy, embroidered covers, valued for warmth and prestige, trapped body heat and moisture, accelerating pest reproductive cycles. Archaeological recovery of mattress remnants is rare, but impressions of quills compressed into mineralized wood at Herculaneum confirm Down's presence. Pollen analysis from fiber matrices shows consistent traces of wheat and barley florals even in elite contexts, indicating straw admixtures regardless of official claims to luxury. Such heterogeneity diversified the pest niche, supporting simultaneous colonization by species with distinct microhabitat preferences. Head and body lice constituted the most ubiquitous human parasites. Combs excavated from military forts at Carlisle, England, preserve chitinous nits cemented to teeth gaps, demonstrating vigorous yet ultimately futile grooming. Body lice thrived in tunics and cloaks, rarely washed due to wool shrinkage risk. Garments hung overnight on wooden pegs, merely cooling rather than sterilizing. Entomological surveys of textile fragments from the Roman necropolis of Lugnano uncover Pediculus humanus exuviae across social strata, refuting assumptions that wealth bought immunity. Nobler wardrobes incorporated silk trims and purple dyes, but remained stitched onto the same coarse underlinen where lice congregated. Rotational wearing, keeping one set of clothes while laundering another, was logistically challenging when fullers demanded days for urine-soaking cycles, ensuring continuous host availability for parasites. Nit removal depended on manual extraction and aromatic salves containing cedar oil or iris root. These substances suffocated some adults but rarely penetrated eggshells. Sulfur ointments added potency yet irritated skin, leading many to accept low-level itch as quotidian background rather than pathology. The shared seating of bathhouses further homogenized louse populations, transferring them across households at a pace rivaling commerce. Domestic dogs and cats, integral to pest control against rodents, carried Ctenocephalides felis and Pulex irritans into interiors. Amphitheater graffiti depict lapdogs alongside mistresses, their fur likely crawling with fleas that widened host range during evening repose. Stable flies and flea larvae occupied straw fodder under tavern lofts, emerging en masse during humid summers when Tiber water vaporized into alleys. Paleoparasitologists sieving cesspit sediments beneath Pompeian taverns identify flea beetle chitin layers in stratified peaks correlating with mid-1st century occupation surges. These peaks coincide with reported outbreaks of febrile illness, possibly murine typhus, though textual vagueness precludes definitive linkage. Nonetheless, flea ecology underscores the porous boundary between companion animals, livestock, and human quarters, foreshadowing later plague vectors. Cymex lectularius established formidable populations within timber bed frames, whose mortise and tenon joints created dark refuges. Evidence emerges from insect impressions in the resinous glue of surviving furniture and from coprolite smears on plaster walls, visible as reddish streaks beneath subsequent repaints. Bedbugs tolerated temperature fluctuations, capitalizing on hypercaust-warmed floors in colder months and migrating upward when heat dissipated. Medical writers described nightly punctures, leaving linear wheels, attributing irritation to atmospheric imbalance rather than insect histamine. Remedies recommended burning sulfonated pitch near bed legs or sprinkling crushed rue and wormwood beneath mattresses. Both exuded strong odors repellent to some arthropods, but hazardous to respiratory health when inhaled in enclosed rooms. Storage mites and scabies mites exploited grain reserves and skin folds, respectively. Granaries adjacent to dwellings released acarus sero into air currents that settled onto bed linens, triggering dermatitis in chronic exposure. Roman domestic slaves tasked with grain sifting developed pitted fingernails and hyperkeratosis, pathologies recorded in skeletal lesions among workers interred southeast of Ostia's Horea Epigatiana. Scabies, harder to diagnose archaeologically, surfaces indirectly through ointment recipes blending lead carbonate and pork fat applied to interdigital webs. Such treatments offered momentary relief, yet risked systemic lead absorption, illustrating recurring trade-offs between comfort and toxicity. Black rats and house mice shadowed grain convoys from Egypt and Sardinia, disembarking at Ostian warehouses before infiltrating urban fabric. Sewer networks provided migration corridors, while collapsed hypocaust tiles offered nesting cavities close to kitchen scraps. Analysis of rat mandibles in the Cloaca Maxima indicates body masses larger than modern equivalents, attributable to calorie-dense refuse and absence of chemical rodenticides. Cats patrolled storerooms, but rarely ventured into deeper sewer shafts, where rodents reproduced unchallenged. Periodic flushes from bathhouse discharge drowned cohorts, yet also deposited organic sludge nourishing successive litters. Roofline aqueducts supplied dripping condensation that sustained rodent thirst even during droughts. Thus, Roman water architecture multiplied both cleansing and contamination vectors, fostering coexistence rather than eradication. Commerce sprouted around infestation mitigation. Apothecaries marketed cedarwood shavings in linen sachets, cinnamon bark fumigants, and alum blocks to sprinkle under bedding. Traveling hawkers sold weasel pelts claimed to deter rodents through scent. However, chemical tests of excavated sachets reveal primary agents were common rosemary and salt, cheaper substitutes packaged with aspirational labels. Household slaves rotated bedding onto terraces for solar irradiation, banking on ultraviolet rays to desiccate eggs. Partial efficacy merely delayed resurgence. More radical households periodically burned entire mattresses, evidenced by charred down deposits in courtyard hearth layers. Replacement demand sustained a mattress-making guild documented on an Ostian mosaic portraying Eros stuffing a sack with feathers, implicitly connecting erotic pleasure and pest-free rest. Public morality entwined pest presence with virtue. Satirists equated flea-ridden couches with moral laxity, while Stoic philosophers praised indifference to bites as testament to discipline. Imperial edicts mandating bed fumigation for barrack soldiers served dual purpose: protect troop health and broadcast state concern. Yet logistical strain meant compliance waxed and waned with campaign seasons. Elite circles commissioned silver bed frames, touting metal's resistance to insect colonization. Yet silver conducted hypercaust heat inefficiently, leading owners to drape wool throws that reintroduced infestation risk. The cycle encapsulated a broader Roman pattern: technological display offset by unintended hygienic consequences. Modern microscopy extracts parasite DNA from hair combs, textiles, and soil, confirming species identifications. Y chromosome sequences inside louse nits link regional strains, mapping trade routes through parasite genealogy. Protein residues within bedbug coprolites disclose human blood group frequencies, offering demographic snapshots of households long vanished. Through these microarchives, pest histories illuminate social networks, mobility, and domestic labor invisible in marble inscriptions. As aqueduct flow dwindled in late antiquity, humidity in upper floors decreased, reducing some infestation intensity. Conversely, unheated ruins encouraged rodent expansion. Bedbugs persisted, transitioning to wooden churches and monastic dormitories, where vows of poverty limited bedding renewal. Lice rode pilgrim cloaks across Europe, seeding outbreaks in Crusader camps and Renaissance courts alike, testament to Roman hygiene's enduring vulnerabilities. Industrial-era insecticides finally curtailed centuries-old lineages, yet bred chemical resistance mirrored in modern urban resurgence. Contemporary pest management still wrestles with balancing toxicity, cost, and efficacy, a trilemma familiar to Roman fumigators wielding sulfur pots. The pest-infested sleeping quarters of Rome expose a society where luxury cohabited with vermin, goose down mingled with lice, and silver bed frames rested on rodent-gnawed joists. Physical comfort and symbolic status collided with ecological realities, underscoring hygiene as negotiated compromise rather than linear progress. We now advance to dismantle another misconception, the so-called vomitorium, a misunderstood architectural term masking voluntary purging practices that reveal deeper tensions between excess and control at imperial banquets. Few misconceptions about Roman life linger as stubbornly as the idea that banquet halls contain special chambers where revelers withdrew to empty their stomachs and resume feasting. Popular culture identifies these alleged rooms by the dramatic name vomitoria, conjuring images of mosaic corridors spattered with half-digested dormice and honey-glazed thrush. The notion fuses genuine elite habits of self-induced purging with a misreading of architectural terminology, then anchors the hybrid myth in modern fascination with decadent excess. A closer inspection of building plans, literary references, and physiological practices dismantles the conflation, revealing subtler relationships between appetite, restraint, and engineered space. Latin builders used vomitorium, plural vomitoria, to describe vaulted passageways that let crowds surge into or out of amphitheatres, theatres and stadiums. The term derives from vomir, to spew forth, but referred strictly to the rapid discharge of spectators, not of gastric contents. Surviving plans of the Colosseum illustrate concentric rings of corridors linked by radial vomitoria, each angled to prevent bottlenecks while directing traffic to assigned seating tiers. Inscriptions over archways labelled vomitoria numeros aided orientation, much like aisle numbers in modern arenas. Domestic architecture offers no analogous space. Excavated palaces on the Palatine Hill, seaside villas at Herculaneum, and provincial mansions at Canimbriga reveal triclinia, dining rooms, culinary, kitchens, and latrinae, latrines, but no structurally distinct recess dedicated to purging. Banquet suites occasionally adjoined garden peristyles, allowing diners to stroll between courses, yet these colonnades served aesthetic and climatic rather than digestive functions. The semantic confusion arose during the 19th century, when antiquarian writers unfamiliar with stadium layouts encountered the word in Vitruvian glossaries and applied it to feasting lore circulating in satires. Through repetition in travel guides and later in school textbooks, the error calcified into pseudo-fact. Despite architectural misattribution, voluntary vomiting did figure in Roman dining culture, though more as behavioral technique than spatial design. Elite banquets operated on a multi-hour sequence of gustatio starters, prima mensa main courses, secunda mensa desserts, and wine-soaked symposium. Hosts sought both display of abundance and endurance of participation. Facing dozens of dishes spiced with pepper, cumin, and the ubiquitous garum, diners balance pleasure against physical limits by resorting to mechanical emesis. Sources such as Seneca's Moral Epistles and Pliny's Natural History describe individuals who purged mid-feast to make room for more delights, framing the act as moral failing and medical hazard. The passages lack structural detail, implying that vomiting unfolded opportunistically, behind curtains in peristyles, against garden hedges, or into portable bronze basins discreetly supplied by slaves. Material culture corroborates with the discovery of shallow bronze or silver vessels, often labelled basinaria in auction inventories, bearing acid etching inconsistent with wine alone. The physiological mechanics relied on feather quills or finger insertion to trigger gag reflexes. Apitius-style cookery, rich in fat and sweet savoury sauces, produced chyme conducive to swift evacuation. Wine mixed with honey further lowered esophageal resistance by coating mucosa. Repetition of the cycle over years likely contributed to chronic gastritis among habitual practitioners, a pathology hinted at by skeletal lesions on thoracic vertebrae consistent with prolonged retching. Self-induced vomit bridged class identity and philosophical critique. Stoic moralists cited the practice as evidence of moral decadence, appetite outrunning necessity, pleasure mastered by compulsion. Purge behavior underlined competing values within Roman society: temperantia, moderation, versus luxuria, excess. The technique also intersected with patronage politics. At feasts celebrating political triumphs, hosts deployed profuse courses to display largesse. Guests purged to maintain face by sampling everything, reinforcing reciprocal obligation loops. Purging rituals manifested in material display. Embroidered napkins scented with nard to disguise acid odor. Ivory hairpins doubling as emetic tools. Gemstone rings set with hollow carnelian capable of holding vomit-stimulating resin. Such artifacts appear in burial contexts of wealthy women at Vagnari Estate in Apulia. suggesting gender parity in the practice despite literary focus on male philosophers' disapproval. Absence of dedicated vomitoria does not imply lack of spatial strategies for containing effluent. Large houses' integrated latrines proximate to triclinia, accessible via short corridors, yet visually shielded by angle walls or tapestry screens. Floor mosaics, particularly in North African villas, depict marine motifs leading from dining area to latrine, guiding intoxicated guests toward relief while celebrating Neptune's purifying waters. Ceramic pipes beneath these rooms connected to sewer lines or cesspits, providing disposal infrastructure comparable to bathhouse drains. In contexts where purging occurred outside latrine boundaries, household slaves wielded sawdust, powdered chalk, and vinegar to neutralize odors and clump solids before sweeping residue into buckets. These cleaning routines paralleled those following wine spills or dropped dishes, embedding emesis management within broader service protocols rather than requiring unique chambers. Kitchen staff consciously modulated menu pacing to sustain appetite. Alternation of fatty meats with pickled relishes stimulated salivation and digestive fluids, pushing satiety thresholds. Ice-chilled snow flavored with mulsum, honey wine, refreshed palates, while pepper-spiked dormouse stuffing provoked transient thermogenesis, triggering hunger return. Recipes in the Apicius corpus include instructions for lightening the stomach through herb vinegar served between courses, effectively a mild purgative. Dedicated drink stewards, pochillatores, managed wine dilution ratios, switching to lighter Falernian after heavy cacuben to prolong consumption capacity. Culinary performance thus wove physiological manipulation into the aesthetic choreography of dining, with voluntary vomiting as extreme endpoint rather than central tenet. Volitional emesis appears cross-culturally, wherever status ties to conspicuous consumption, from medieval Mongol feasts employing leather vomit bags to early modern European glove-covered basins at royal banquets. Rome's variant distinguishes itself through integration with philosophical discourse and eventual misclassification as architectural feature. The myth of purpose-built rooms crystallized only when Victorian observers, themselves grappling with industrial excess and moral propriety, projected spatial order onto behaviors they found shocking. Excavation methods prioritizing latrine deposits, sewer channels, and rubbish tips yield abundant organic refuse, animal bones, shell, seeds, yet seldom reveal concentrated vomit layers. The acidic nature of gastric effluent accelerates carbonate dissolution, leaving minimal macro evidence, but chemical sampling can detect elevated bile acids. A targeted geochemical survey beneath triclinia floors at Oplontis Villa A found only background levels, implying efficient cleaning or off-site deposition rather than in-room expulsion. If purpose-built vomitoria had existed, we would expect telltale features: sloping waterproof floors, drainage basins, distinct hydraulic linkage. None appear in corpus of domestic plans compiled in the former Urbis Romae. Negative architectural evidence thus aligns with textual nuance, reinforcing separation between linguistic term and digestive behavior. Modern amusement parks label exit tunnels vomitoria in playful homage to stadium design, perpetuating partial truth while inadvertently prolonging misconception. Popular novels and films stage characters rushing to opulent side chambers to heave, merging spectacle with pseudo-historical verisimilitude. Academic outreach campaigns now clarify the distinction, yet public imagination proves resilient when a myth satisfies narrative appetite for decadence. The endurance of the vomitorium myth testifies to cultural fascination with boundaries of pleasure. how bodies negotiate social expectations of excess, how spaces absorb or conceal resultant mess. In Roman reality, that negotiation unfolded through movable objects, flexible etiquette, and standard latrines rather than dedicated purge chambers. The real drama lay not in specialized architecture, but in ethical debates and physiological strains experienced by diners pursuing impossible equilibrium between appetite and decorum. By tracing the gap between lexical meaning and popular misinterpretation, we illuminate Rome's deft balancing act, designing infrastructure that managed bodily outputs while projecting ideals of control. The pattern repeats in the next arena, drinking water itself. Lead-lined luxury transported crystal-clear streams from mountain springs into urban fountains and palatial taps, only to leach toxins that seeped quietly into bloodstreams, shaping health outcomes across generations. Roman urban life dazzled visitors with fountains that flung crystal arcs above mosaic pavements, apartment blocks where every story could draw water from wall taps, and palatial villas whose dining rooms boasted trickling table ornaments shaped like dolphins. Beneath this spectacle lay kilometers of plumbing fabricated from rolled sheets of lead, fistulae plumbae, soldered into tubes and joined by swollen collars. Lead's malleability, combined with its resistance to external corrosion, made it a builder's dream material. Its quiet toxicity remained invisible to an age that measured water by clarity and taste alone. Aqueducts delivered mountain spring water to city gatehead tanks called castella. From there, carpenters and plumbers channeled flow through lead pipes running atop arches, beneath streets, and even through upper-story walls. Inscribed stamps recorded the reigning emperor and pipe diameter, transforming infrastructure into propaganda. Hydraulic head pressures rarely exceeded 1 bar, low enough for lead to withstand without bursting, yet high enough to carry water uphill within buildings. Archaeological surveys of Rome's Aqua Claudia extension reveal branch networks dense as modern electrical grids. No other ancient civilization approached this plumbing penetration. By soldering seams with molten lead-tin alloy, technicians sealed each joint in seconds, an efficiency unmatched by stone or ceramic alternatives. Calculations of labor input per linear meter suggest lead pipes halved installation time relative to carved stone channels, justifying their premium cost. The metal's sweet taste, resulting from trace lead acetate formed in alkaline water, even drew praise from poets who likened fresh draughts to nectar. The same acetate dissolved quiet micrograms of neurotoxin into every cup. Lead leaching varied with water chemistry. Acidic springs from volcanic aquifers of Latium dissolved carbonic acid that stripped passivating carbonate layers inside pipes, elevating solute concentrations. Warm water in bathhouse header tanks further accelerated dissolution by tenfold compared with cold conduits. Modern reconstructions using replica pipes demonstrate leachate levels between 20 micrograms per litre in neutral water and 120 micrograms per litre in acidic water, figures far above modern safety thresholds. Yet drinking water formed only one conduit. Culinary practice compounded exposure. Grape must was slowly simmered in lead-lined kettles to produce sapa and defrutum. Viscous syrups used as sweetener and preservative. Organic acids emusculated lead, yielding concentrations so high that a single spoonful could deliver milligrams of the metal. Archaeometric analysis of amphora residues from Pompeii quantifies lead at up to 5 milligrams per kilo, exceeding contemporary medicinal doses. Cosmetics and face powders blended white lead carbonate for opacity. Herbal remedies prescribed lead oxide paste for eye inflammation. Glazes on courseware pots added further microdoses. Until recently, debate persisted over whether plumbing alone could create systemic poisoning. New multi-pronged studies now situate water within a broader environmental matrix. Ice cores drilled in Arctic and alpine glaciers reveal distinct lead isotope spikes between 100 BCE and 200 CE, corresponding to Roman silver-lead ore smelting peaks. Atmospheric circulation deposited particulates across Europe and the Mediterranean, ensuring even rural populations inhaled lead-laden dust. Skeletal chemistry offers individual snapshots. Analysis of petrous bone from inhabitants of Londinium shows lead burdens far higher than those of pre-Roman Iron Age burials in the same locale. Migrant merchants, soldiers, and families alike manifested elevated isotopic signatures matching Iberian galena mines. Direct testimony that imperial trade distributed toxins alongside olive oil and garum. Lead even penetrated enamel microstructures of children interred in cemetery plots outside Ostia's walls. Trace element mapping identifies biogenic deposition during tooth development, signaling exposure before age 7. Correlated stature measurements show mild growth stunting, hinting at subclinical health impacts across demographics, not merely elites. No written source explicitly links lead to cognitive decline. Humoral medicine lacked concepts of neurotoxicity. Nonetheless, symptoms pepper elite correspondence. Migraines, gout-like joint pain, infertility, sudden mood shifts, and memory lapses. Modern toxicology recognizes each as classic lead responses. A recent modeling study applying contemporary dose-response curves to Roman blood lead estimates concludes that average IQ may have dropped by up to 3 points across the empire, comparable to US children's decline during mid-20th century petrol lead peaks. Chronic exposure compromises fertility, a potential factor in declining aristocratic birth rates noted by late imperial moralists. Lead also disrupts uric acid metabolism, possibly explaining the rampant gout caricatured in satires. Heavy burdens accumulate in bone, leaching back into bloodstream during pregnancy and prolonged illness. Thus, even temporary removal to rural villas offered only brief respite. Not all scholars accept sweeping toxicity narratives. A 2024 materials science reassessment argues that rapid formation of carbonate scale inside pipes curtailed leaching, keeping most water under hazardous thresholds, especially where springs emerged from limestone beds. The study stresses that diet, cosmetics, and industry may outweigh pipes in cumulative dose. Critics reply that scale thickness fluctuated with hydraulic disruption. Maintenance teams regularly scraped pipes clear to restore flow, re-exposing raw metal. Evidence of such scouring appears in pipe fragments displaying alternating smooth and gouged interiors. Regional variability further complicates matters. Settlements tapping neutral pH river water likely suffered less than volcanic regions. Conversely, mining centers such as Carthago Nova experienced occupational exposures, orders of magnitude higher, dwarfing any waterborne contribution. Thus, lead-poisoned Rome simplifies a patchwork of ecological niches and personal habits. Lead signified technological prowess. The glittering rotae, water wheels powering flour mills at Barbagal, relied on lead valves and gaskets. Villa fountains jetting water into painted grottos showcased aesthetic control of nature. Pipe stamps charted successive emperors, turning urban infrastructure into a ledger of dynastic continuity. Abandoning lead would have undermined both image and supply networks that employed foundry workers, miners, and transport crews from Britannia to Dalmatia. The metal's ubiquity also bound disparate social strata into a shared exposure. Slaves drawing water from street fountains, soldiers draining canteens, senators sipping mulsum, all consume fractions of the same invisible contaminant. Rare was the citizen completely untouched, though socioeconomic status modulated dose via luxury syrups and cosmetics. Therefore, lead functioned as a quiet social leveler, an ironic egalitarianism at biochemical scale. As Vandal raids shattered aqueduct bridges in the 5th century and Ostrogothic sieges severed maintenance supply chains, water flow dwindled to a trickle. Lead pipes, now partly dry, oxidized internally, forming crusts that eventually clogged conduits. Survivors scavenged pipe sections for roof flashing or sale as scrap. Late antique chronicles describe wells reopening in forum squares, marking return to groundwater sources with lower lead content but higher microbial risk. The public health effect shifted from neurotoxin exposure to waterborne disease, trading one invisible threat for another. Archaeologists tracing pipe removal trenches in post-Roman layers note selective salvage, larger diameters disappearing first, indicating informed valuation of recyclable lead. Recovered offcuts melted into weights, sling bullets, and even reliquary linings for emerging Christian shrines, extending exposure into new contexts, albeit at reduced scale. Contemporary urban planners confront remnants of lead pipe logic. 19th century European cities revived lead plumbing before recognizing its danger. 21st century municipalities still struggle to replace aging lines. Debates echo Roman precedent: cost versus safety, convenience versus unseen risk. Modern Flint crises and archaeological revelations align temporally distant societies along the same toxic continuum. Recent ice core data underscore planet-spanning impact. Roman atmospheric lead deposition registers in Greenland, demonstrating humanity's early capacity to globalize pollution. Measurements show a dip during 3rd century turmoil when mining slowed, linking imperial fiscal crises directly to environmental respite, an inadvertent experiment in emissions reduction. Lead-lined luxury encapsulates Rome's dialectic of mastery and vulnerability. Engineering ambition delivered water on a scale unmatched until modern times, but the choice of material embedded a neurotoxic flaw. Exposure pathways multiplied through culinary innovation, personal adornment, and industrial smelting, weaving a metallic thread through daily routine at every social level. Research over the past decade, from bone geochemistry to Arctic ice stratigraphy, confirms breadth of contamination while refining dose estimations and regional variability. Rome did not fall solely because of lead, yet lead exemplifies how infrastructure can erode the bodies it aims to serve. The empire's gleaming ducts remind contemporary societies that material selections made for convenience or aesthetics may incubate latent hazards detectable only centuries later. The lesson resonates beyond antiquity. Progress demands vigilance toward invisible costs. With water, wine, and even the air itself tainted, the Roman world moved through a haze of neurotoxin that dulled minds while sustaining spectacle. Rome's reputation for grandeur has always rested on marble facades, soaring arches, and an iron will to engineer nature into submission. Yet behind the facades, we have traced a parallel empire, one built of sweat-glossed skin, vinegar-soaked sponges, fish sauce breath, abrasive tooth powders, feather-infested mattresses, voluntary purges, and pipes that bled invisible poison into gleaming water. Each chapter has shown that Roman hygiene was less a march toward cleanliness than a constant negotiation with dirt, disguising it, repurposing it, exporting it, or forcing it to flow elsewhere. That negotiation produced marvels, aqueducts that still stand, baths whose mosaics shimmer under museum lights, sewers that still drain a living city. It also produced unintended legacies, parasites archived in calcified sludge, lead woven into human bones, and metaphors of cloacal corruption that still flavor political speech. In Rome, nothing stayed private for long. Bodies, smells, and wastes crossed social boundaries as readily as trade caravans crossed frontiers. The empire's genius lay in harnessing those crossings to sustain spectacle, often at the cost of silent, cumulative harm. Seen through this lens, Rome looks less like a civilization that ignored hygiene than one that redefined it, equating perfume with purity, equating whiteness with virtue, equating relentless throughput with public health. Our own age inherits similar temptations. We brand single-use plastics as sanitary, perfume city air with industrial fragrances, rinse microfibers into oceans, and pipe chemical residues out of sight, all while congratulating ourselves on progress. The stench of Rome lingers then, as cautionary scent mark, a reminder that ingenuity without foresight can leave toxins sandwiched between layers of triumph. To study the empire's disgusting hygiene habits is not merely to gawp at ancient eccentricities, but to hold a mirror to present habits. Proof that civilization's shine is always polished against the grain of waste. If the Cloaca Maxima still murmurs beneath modern Rome, it does so with a message as clear as any inscription. What we flush away today becomes archaeology tomorrow. Our descendants will read those layers as we have read Rome's, inhale their faint odors, and judge whether our own notions of cleanliness were, in the end, any less contradictory than those of the emperors who once perfumed their sweat and called it glory. Thank you for coming on this journey with me tonight. If you enjoyed this story, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and maybe even comment on other places you would like to visit, and I'll try and make it happen. May sound sleep and beautiful dreams come to you tonight, my friend. You deserve it.